The Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 98.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have you along as well. Kudos, as always, to our host news radio station, KFAI. Just so powerful, so wonderful, so diverse, so eclectic. We used to call it a different radio station every hour. That's because of the station's ability to connect with people from different backgrounds, different voices, different idioms, every day, all day, every hour. And so we're in that vein as well today. We've got a great program, colleagues joining me from around the country, sometimes from around the world, talking about issues that are important. We call this an effort to create robust conversation. I think we're going to deliver that as well today. I'm going to remind people to know that wherever you are, 2 Facebook platforms that we're on, we're streaming to 2 YouTube platforms. We're also on LinkedIn, and we're also on Twitter. We appreciate your presence. Let us know that you're listening or involved. Send us a note, a comment. If you want to get in the conversation, just drop a note in the comment section. If we get a chance to, we'll invite you to jump on live as well. And we want you to support what we're doing, and we'll let you know over the course of the hour how you can subscribe to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Well, let me begin with a new feature. We are going to do this regularly every Tuesday, I believe, and that's a conversation with my colleague, a sports section with Coach Leah. Coach Leah, how you doing, my friend?
I am fabulous, and welcome everybody to a terrific Tuesday, hanging out with Al McFarlane, the conversation. I'm so happy to be here. So happy to be here.
Well, happy to have you here. What's on the agenda for today?
So right away, I want to bring in a special guest. We have Richard Walker, who is a special contributor to Insight News Sports. And Rich, can you pop in here and join us for a minute? So
good afternoon.
Good afternoon, my friend. And I want to formally introduce you to our editor-in-chief, Al McFarlane, and who has been really encouraging me to, invite other great writers to join us with Inside Sports. And, you were literally at the top of the list of people that I wanted to make sure join us with our journey in building out a robust and wonderful sports page. And, whenever you can hang out with us on Tuesdays. And look, I know you're doing double duty right now. So talk to us about where you are right now and what you're up to.
Well, I'm actually sort of in the middle of a lot of things right now, but I work with the NFL alumni, and specifically we have an initiative that's called Tackle Obesity, and it started with myself and 6 other former NFL players on a journey to lose weight. And this program started in 2021. We all lost weight on the program. Some notable names on the program was the recently passed Dick Butkus. He lost 47 pounds on the program at age 79. Mike Golick, who you guys may know, is the host of the ESPN morning show. He was on the program. He lost 60 pounds. I am the leader so far. I've reached the 120-pound mark next week.
Wait. So 120, Richard?
120.
Wow, that is fabulous. Fantastic. Keep going.
And so we did so well in the program that we decided, well, this is not something that we want to keep to ourselves. So it has transformed into a cause where we are now using our platform as an opportunity to create public awareness of this issue. Because the issue here is that, specifically with men, it's difficult to get men to talk about the challenges with weight and obesity. To drill down a little bit further, obesity, it impacts all of us as a nation. We're currently at like 40% obesity rate, which is absurd to think that 4 out of 10 Americans are in a state of, overweight or obese. But the numbers are even more staggering with the African American community, and beyond that, even higher among African American men. So we're using this as a platform to create awareness, to let our brothers know that, and sisters know that, there are options out there, there's information out there, there's ways that we can change our lifestyles without having to suffer. There are medical options for those who just can't lose the weight on their own. But this is a awareness blitz that we're doing through the NFL alumni and also partnering through NFL Flag. And this is what we're doing to create awareness.
So Rich, listen, we want to pivot really quickly because we've got about three other things that we want to talk to you about today. Your article that is in Insight right now, Otis Anderson. Let's talk about that Hall of Fame omission real quick.
Absolutely, and this kind of ties into the tackle obesity because Otis is one of our guys in the program.
Yes.
And that's how he and I met, and I started to get close with Otis. He was a little bit before my time. I was a football fan, but I was still in my younger years, so I wasn't really dialed into his career.
Sure.
But as I met the guy, I went back and evaluated his career. And I'm like, wait a minute, this man had a Hall of Fame career. Why isn't he in Kent?
That part.
So when I started drilling down to the numbers and looking at the perspective of when he played, he was 8th in rushing when he retired. He's still top 20 in rushing touchdowns. He's still top 30 in rushing yards. He's got more rushing touchdowns than O.J. Simpson, Thurman Thomas, Marshall Falks, and Hicks. Now, I had to understand, why is that? And I'm a college football Hall of Fame voter. So I use my experience as a voter to evaluate the process for the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Okay, so let me pop in. So we're having just a little bit of technical issues with your audio.
Okay,
and so
sorry.
This is what I wanna say. So Richard is a member of the NFL Football Writers Association, if I'm not mistaken. That's the proper title.
College football writers.
College football. However, he has a vote, and so now it makes sense for Rich to have a vote, Al, because Richard, in our opinion, because I kind of side with what Richard is saying in his article, and this whole premise of the media having such a heavy weight in voting, and they don't have the experience as an athlete. But that's not the case with Rich, because he is an NFL alum, a former college football player as well. And so we're hoping that the tides will be able to turn in the coming years for a lot of different voting entities, because however important it is for the media and journalists to have a voice, of course, we're in this space. To have the perspective of an athlete is really, really important as well, because again, how could someone like Otis Anderson, with the kind of stats he has, not be a member already? So, what can we do at this point?
Richard, thank you for jumping in. Your sound is unstable, so we want to tell you thanks. And next time, make sure that we do some prep work to get you the best quality voice, because I think some people are missing some of the things you're saying. But thank you so much for being here. I'm excited about what you're doing with weight loss. We have an award-winning weight loss program locally here called Insight to Health Fitness Challenge. I'm going to share that with you, and I'm sure there's going to be space for us to bounce off each other and collab in the future. Coach Leah, what else you got? We got about 3 minutes. What else you got?
Well, I wanted just to mention really quick the second annual Tall Girls United Wellness, Wealth, and Winning Conference is coming up, held alongside the NCAA Women's Final Four. Al, I'm always so honored to know that you are a huge supporter of the initiatives that we're doing for women's sports and women's basketball. And this year, for our second year in a row, we will have our Ultimate Brunch and Forum moderated by ESPN's LaChina Robinson. And we will have our first ever TGU talk headlined by world champion from the Houston Comets, Yolanda Moore. So, and then a really, really brilliant panel. This year, our honorary chairs is our NBA legend and Big Ten star for both Wisconsin and Ohio State, Brad Sellers, Kim Sellers, and their 4 daughters, which includes another Big Ten star, their youngest daughter, Cheyenne Sellers, who plays for the University of Maryland right now. And so we'll be in Ohio, and in my opinion, having the endorsement and honor from the Sellers family. And so we're really, really excited about that. So we look forward to converging on Cleveland alongside the women's Final Four, but bringing really good insights. I love that, of wellness, wealth, and winning. Oh, real quick, our other Minneapolis homegirl, Tracy Henderson Edwards, will be joining us on the panel. So we'll be giving you more information as the days come. But yeah, I think that's all we have for today's segment.
There were a couple of pictures we had set to go. Let's share them for those who can see the video. Just tell them what they are, and then we'll wrap this up.
So that's Brad Sellers back in his collegiate days. And so he is the mayor of Warrensville Heights, which is a first-tier suburb of Cleveland. So he's been a mayor now for, quite a while. So yeah, and then these are his 4 daughters, and Kim Sellers, who is actually a media mogul in the Cleveland area, had a stellar journalist radio career in the Cleveland area. And she is the founder of a foundation focused on MS. So she is battling MS, but still fighting, still out there leading the charge, and will be helping us to do a lot of really great media and promo in the Cleveland area in the coming days.
Well, for our radio listeners, we're speaking to your mind's eye, and we're hoping that you can visualize what we're seeing online on our live streams. But Coach, thank you. If people want to connect to you for story ideas, potential guests, how should they do that?
So be sure to send an email to Coach Leah, that's CoachLeah at insightnews.com. That is the best way. And then we will reach out, either myself or a member of our team will reach out to you right away. If you've got any ideas, any comments, whatever it is, we would love to hear from you. And then, of course, all of our Insight News platforms, Facebook, YouTube, all the ways, LinkedIn, all the ways. Yes.
Super. Coach Leah, thank you, my friend. We'll see you next time, okay?
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. We continue. Bob Amsterdam is with me today. Robert Amsterdam is an international lawyer with 40 years experience working on high-profile cases in emerging markets. He's a founding partner of Amsterdam and Partners LLP. It's a boutique international law firm with offices in London and in Washington, D.C. And it's an innovative practice that explores synergies between public international law, international criminal law, and political advocacy. Amsterdam has been retained by numerous sovereign governments and political parties and candidates, high net worth individuals, foreign investors, and multinational corporations. Current and past clients include the Republic of Turkey, former Prime Minister of Mongolia, Chamed Saikimbileg, former President of Zambia, Rupiah Banda, former Prime Minister of Thailand, Thaksin Shinawatra, and Russian billionaire Mikhail Khodorkovsky, among others. The law firm is well known for its pro bono practice in human rights, including the defense of Ilya Ponomarev, I'll get that right, an exiled Russian state Duma deputy, Maurice Kamto, leader of the Cameroon resistance movement, Bob Wine, a Ugandan member of parliament and opposition leader, and Tundu Lissu, leader of Chadema party in Tanzania. The firm has also represented George's Tadonki, who is a United Nations employee who survived a campaign of intimidation by officials in Zimbabwe, a case which resulted in Amsterdam and Partners LLP being awarded the Global Pro Bono Dispute of the Year award from the American Lawyer. And as a prolific columnist and blogger, Amsterdam's writings have been published in the New York Times, the Financial Times, and Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Forbes, among other publications. He's made numerous television appearances on networks such as CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg, BBC, Fox News, and for many years he's written a bi-monthly column for Spears on issues facing United Nations NWIs. I'm not sure what that means. We'll find out in a second. And he's also the host of the popular literary podcast Departures. Profiles of him have appeared in the Globe and Mail, Le Monde, and American Lawyer. He's a member of the Canadian and International Bar Association, licensed as a solicitor in the United Kingdom. He earned his BA from Carleton University in Ottawa and studied law at Queen's University in Ontario. Bob, welcome to the conversation. It's a long introduction, but a great one. Thank you for being here, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Let me tell you, I want to reach out to Coach Leah because I thought I was on for the weight loss segment. I was disappointed. We're going to talk about these political cases.
Well, you and I have the same situation. I put in my 2 cents worth on our weight loss activity as well, so we got a lot in common here. But you connected with me. I connected with you to find out your take and your work with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and the question is about, while there is the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, what's this position and the impact of that conflict on the Ukraine Orthodox Church? How does that line up? How do we consider that as we take in the news about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? Let you know that join us here just to listen and to maybe ask questions as a part of this conversation. 2 of my colleagues, Antonio Rosell, is here in Twin Cities. He's from Peru, and he's an international peace activist, has done conversations, engagements around Palestine and North and South America, Cuba, etc. And then also joining us is my colleague, the editor of our section we call Afrodescendientes, and that is Yogi Sena, who's joining us from Bahia in Brazil. So with that, let me sort of pass the microphone to you to talk about the situation with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and how that figures in. What's your concern about that church, its posture, its position amid the conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, look, thank you, Al, very much for having me, and I have a lot of respect for what you're doing in the Twin Cities. We were just in Kiev last week. I was appointed by the Holy Synod of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to assist them as they fight for their survival. The Ukrainian government has been saying around the world that they need to ban this church because this church is somehow Russian affiliated. And we were retained to represent them. And I think one of the qualifications of my retainer is not that I'm such a bright lawyer. It's that I'm one of the few lawyers who are banned from Russia because I represented the Russian opposition. I'm banned from 7 countries, including many in Africa, for representing opposition leaders. So I was a perfect guy to take on this case because the Ukrainians attack anyone who's involved in any way in opposition to their policies as being pro-Putin. And that doesn't work for me. So I went to Ukraine after having read and spoken to the clients about the persecution of the church, and was astounded by what I found, which was that the attack on the church has been going on since 2014, since the Maidan revolution. And what many people don't recognize is that revolution was a very, very much a populist and nationalist revolution with the support of the United States government. And one of the themes in all of this has been that the US government actually turns out to have a policy to destroy our church. And the evidence for that actually comes from a former Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, Robert Destro, who gave that testimony during a speech just a few weeks ago in Washington. So I met with a number of priests who had been charged criminally. They were charged either with being traitors or with Section 161 of the code, which involves instilling religious animosity, inciting religious animosity. And certainly from the review of the files I had in writing, these charges seemed to be bogus. But it was very important and helpful to actually meet with the priests involved. And tragically, after I finished interviewing priests, no sooner had the interviews finished, but the secret police of Ukraine interrogated these priests. One day after my meeting with these priests, one very senior metropolitan, one of the leaders of the church, his home was attacked by the secret police, and he was intimidated to the point where he had a cardiac infraction that day, and needless to say, is still in recovery. One of the other priests was beaten so badly, he will never be able to return to the pulpit. And these beatings are occurring because there is a competitor church to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and that is a state-based church called the OCU, which was set up by the Poroshenko administration, the administration prior to Zelensky. And that administration was a heavily nationalist administration, wanting to derogate rights from Russian speakers and also wanting to destroy the 1,000-year-old home of Christianity, by the way, which is the UOC, and replace it with the OCU. And before going to Ukraine, I was told that my clients were a very small percentage of the population. So it was a great surprise when I went to church on Sunday to find that my churches were full and in fact flooded. And I'm not like you, Al. I'm a lot older than you. And when I went to church, I was scared of catching some form of communicable disease because my churches I could not get into. They were simply crammed, and the church of the state functioning body were empty. And in fact, the Lavra, which is a unique and magnificent temple of Orthodox Christianity, after the OCU seized it, they held a disco event, which, I mean, if you know Orthodoxy and you know how conservative the Orthodox Church is, it was a complete, I'm sorry to say, a disgrace to those who are, who have grown up in the Orthodox Church and treasure these shrines. It was unfathomable that this kind of behavior would go on. So I also met with leaders of the Rada, which is the parliament of Ukraine, and was shocked by the fact that these men said they had no power, they had no influence with Zelensky. In fact, they were interrogated as well after they met me. I felt like I was the poison chalice meeting these individuals. And, I should say I'm very active in Africa. I represent many of the opposition groups in Africa and have just recently been appointed to act for Nelson Chamisa in Zimbabwe. And, I'm used to being in hostile countries and hostile situations, being banned from 7 or 8 countries now. But I was still shocked by the fact that I was followed by the secret police everywhere, and that they were not hiding. They were there to intimidate me. After I met with a representative of the government, a TV channel cornered me after the meeting, clearly tipped off by the government. They announced me not as a representative of the Ukrainian church, but as a representative of the Russian church. In fact, they named me as a representative of Patriarch Kirill, who is the head of the Russian church and one of the most hated figures in Kiev right now. And in addition to naming me as his advocate, they gave the name of my hotel. So, I mean, they were, and this was on national television. They were clearly out.
Bob, what is the relationship between the Russian church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
They are still, there is a spiritual connection under canon law, but there is no administrative connection because the UOC has after the full-scale invasion, cut off any communication or any ties or any relationship with the church. But that hasn't been enough to satisfy the government, which today, just a few hours ago, this is the first show I've done since then, has announced a new bill, 8371, a new plan to destroy the church and completely disestablish it in Ukraine.
So let me ask you, when I first became aware of you and your work, my gut reaction was that sounds like this is an operative for the Russian government in the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and that your work appeared to me, this is without deep study, something that would destabilize or cause people to question one of the core or to create a division regarding the posture, stature, history of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, with the idea being that church more broadly represents and reflects the Russian-ness of Ukraine. And so that was my first reaction. Would you respond to that?
Listen, I mean, that's the reaction of a lot of people because in the United States today, we're not allowed to think freely. We have to see things in this dichotomy of you're either with Putin or against him in sort of this George Bush simplified world. And because I've been arrested by Putin, so I don't have to always say, the aggressor state and this bullshit. Because I've been arrested by Putin, I've got the freedom to call out these horrific tactics of the Ukrainian government. And by the way, I support aid to Ukraine. I think we have to stand by them through thick or thin because we began the commitment, and you don't, as a superpower, drop out when the going gets tough. But I will say there's no democracy in Ukraine. There's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of religion. And the secret police control everything. And Zelensky is far from a Democrat. And he's far from a great leader when it comes to anything but begging for money. And he's a great motivator. I give him that. And there's a new book out by Simon Schuster called The Showman, which I think is quite credible. I think he has a lot of heart, but, he didn't see the invasion coming. He didn't properly prepare the country for it. The man who saved the country was a guy named Zaluzhny, who was the general who saved Kiev. But we have a cult of personality around him. We have set up, I think, one of the strongest sanctions regimes in the world against Russia. Which I think, quite honestly, is probably blowing up in our face. I think we're destroying half of Europe's economy and empowering Russia and China and India and causing catastrophic breakdown in our relations with the global South, both in Latin America and in Africa. So, I think American policy, weirdly, should be to support Ukraine, but get out of the sanctions business because our lack of leverage with Putin is harming us. It's harming us in the Mideast. It's harming us in Africa. It's harming us with China. This whole idea that we're better off turning people that may be enemies into non-people and breaking them apart from the entire intercourse of life. This is a very dangerous thing. mobilizing hate the way we are doing it. It is horrible. It is unchristian. It is there is something wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how bad Vladimir Putin is. Two of my closest friends were murdered in Russia. I hold no stock in Vladimir Putin, but we are so far from being realistic about who or what Russia is. I'm a very old guy. I remember the 1962 missile gap, when everybody was running around saying the Russians had 10 times more missiles than we had, and we were exposed, and JFK ran on this in the 1960 election. Well, it was all crap. And this idea that Putin's ready to invade England. I'm in London today. He doesn't want any part of this, and nobody with a brain would. I think we're completely overreacting because we've got a lot of incompetent governments. The government in this country is going to be voted out of office in a few months. We have sanctioned the shit out of everybody, and it gets us nothing. We support autocrats all over Africa. Rwanda is our best friend, and he systematically kills his opponents. And has denuded and raped my client, the Democratic Republic of Congo. So, I don't even begin to understand the roots of American foreign policy anymore. My friends here from Latin America, I worked there often. I've been involved in Guatemala for 40 years. I represent right now the government of Venezuela. Only in respect to sanctions. I'm not holding up Mr. Maduro as a great Democrat, but again, we are opposed to sanctions. And we think that from a U.S. standpoint, sanctioning Venezuela when you're going after Russia is a crazy thing to do. I wish there was someone in charge of U.S. foreign policy who could make something consistent about what we're doing, because it just seems chaotic, anarchic, and so dangerous. So anyway,
I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest is Bob Amsterdam. He's a member of the Canadian and International Bar Association's license as a solicitor in the UK. And we're talking about his work with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and more. Let me bring in two of my colleagues. Antonio Rosell is here in Twin Cities, and Yogi Sena joins us from Bahia in Brazil. Have you guys react, and thank you for being here, Bob. Let's turn this into a conversation. And during the conversation, I saw you sort of make some facial reactions. Antonio, what were you thinking, and what are your thoughts about what you've heard so far? Unmute, yeah.
So I have to say, well, first of all, what an honor to be on a show with Al and with Bob Amsterdam and with Joey, of course, to be talking about this really important topic. I think that the information that a lot of people in the United States have about the situation in Ukraine and our nation's role in causing it and exacerbating it. The news media of different kinds are providing us a version of events that actually does not match with reality, and it doesn't illuminate the nefarious and negative role that we have played in creating a conflict that has killed now hundreds of thousands of people. Our hands are very, very dirty in it. And as Mr. Amsterdam said, it's a process that began, way before actually 2014, and it's been kind of trying to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia in order to cause a conflict to weaken Russia, because the United States sees Russia as it sees China as potential competitors on the world stage. And so I know we're in a radio show, but I also know that this is recorded for distribution via YouTube. I shared some images with your wonderful assistant, Cooper, earlier today. And I'm wondering if he could pull them up.
Sure.
Cooper, could you? Yeah, the first one, actually the first image, the 1990 image, if you don't mind. Are you able to do that, Cooper, or should I do that? It's and these are for the segment in Gaza that we'll speak about. There's one that's labeled 1990. I sent 3 images, Cooper. Anyway, it shows the extent. So to the radio audience, the images have not come up. So I'll do my best to describe. So first of all, in 1990, it shows where Russia was in relation to NATO. And there was kind of a boundary between them that was the Warsaw Pact countries, which were all aligned with the Soviet Union. And so Russia was very far from the West, and there was protection for their interior lands. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the promise was given by the United States that NATO, which was the enemy of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, would not expand 1 inch to the east, that there would not be encroachment toward the Soviet Union, or what was then, as the Soviet Union dissolved, Russia. Continually, since 1991, NATO has done the expansion toward the east that they promised they wouldn't do. And so this is the first, thank you very much, Cooper, for pulling that up. So this is where the state of the world, the state of Europe, Asia, Soviet Union was in 1990, before the dissolution of the Soviet Union. You see in red is the Soviet Union itself, in the dark red. In the blue are the nations that were aligned with the United States and with NATO. And in the light pink are the Warsaw Pact nations, which are the equivalent of NATO. And so maybe let's go to the next image, which is actually what happens, has been happening since 1991 until today. Cooper, I wonder if you could switch the image. I'm sorry, there's another one called 2022. And in that image, you see the Warsaw Pact goes away. So that place where all those light pink countries, where there's no longer an association with them. And eventually, each one of them, one by one, they become members of NATO. The Soviet Union, who had a strong presence and investment in East Germany, gives approval for the reunification of Germany, allowing Germany to be an even greater power in Europe, with the understanding as well that Russia's red lines or their interests would be preserved. Nevertheless, the expansion of NATO continues. And maybe now, Cooper, if you can put that third image, which is the one that came up all these other times, that shows. And so what you see now on the screen is Russia, which is, of course, much less of a bloc than it was during the Soviet Union. You see all of the countries in blue, members of NATO. And something that is actually a little bit out of date here is that Sweden and Finland, which are shown as seeking NATO membership, they are now NATO members. Ukraine has been, for the last at least 10 years, if not actually longer, strategically, I would say this is probably since the 1990s, has been seen as and has been prepared to be a NATO member, to be right adjacent to Russia. And a NATO member doesn't just mean, oh, I'm part of an association. A NATO member means I have army, air force, and naval assets that are right next door to Russia. So imagine if, for example, Russia decided to establish bases all along the Mexican coast, all along Mexico, the Mexican border. And
like Cuba back in the day.
And it's the same thing that happened during the 1962 missile crisis, which, and I'll say one more thing about that to go back in history, because it's really interesting to try to go back and see what we can learn. That people call it mistakenly the missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis. It actually is the Turkish Missile Crisis, because the reason why it came up is that the United States placed long-range nuclear missiles in Turkey. And the response from the Soviet Union was, okay, you're going to do that to us. See how you like it. We're going to place our nuclear missiles in Cuba and see how you live with that. So that idea from the 1960s is still the same idea. And this is the desire to turn Ukraine into NATO. And this has been ongoing since at least 2014, where NATO assets, without NATO actually being a member of NATO, have been continually placed into the Ukraine. And it's part of the reason the campaign, they say, people, just different folks who are paying attention to this, approximately 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed thus far in this war that we instigated. And approximately 50,000 Russian soldiers.
Let me bring in.
I think you have that reversed. It's 400,000 Russians and 31,000 Ukrainians.
That's one of those things where there is we may agree to disagree on some of that data, which is fine. But overall, and that's in a way, it's tragic because it still is 500,000 humans who were made by God, who no longer are with us on this planet because of policies that our government has for a long time been working on and has been investing.
Let me bring Yogi in. Yogi, we often talk about the global South and the impact of policies from the North on the global South. And Bob has mentioned on several occasions his work intervening on behalf of opposition parties in Africa and elsewhere. Any impressions or thoughts or questions, Yogi Sena? Unmute if you would. And I think Yogi's connection is frozen. Bob, go ahead and respond. And then I want Antonio to talk about Gaza. And if you're available, stick around, Bob. I'm going to spend 15 minutes for the last part of the program with a presentation or comments about Gaza and the conflict there. But Bob?
Well, look, firstly, I think that we're ascribing too much to the United States. I think the situation is deeply influenced by the United States, but there is this historic issue with Russia where they're granting them the ability to control their entire neighborhood does not really reflect sovereignty. And I think, in fairness to the Ukrainians, they were independent. Their independence was guaranteed by the Budapest Treaty. They stupidly gave up their nuclear arms with guarantees supplied by, among other countries, Russia, and then sustained an invasion in 2014 with the taking of Crimea. Whether or not the Crimeans wanted Russia, which is an open question. So I don't think this is only about NATO. I think there are a lot of drivers in Ukraine. There's a huge portion of the country that wants Ukraine to be free, sovereign, and independent. And in fairness to them, I think we're doing them a disservice by denying them weapons now and literally watching them get slaughtered. So I don't agree with the view that it is just a contest between the United States and Russia to bleed Russia. I think we are bleeding Russia, but I think Russia is gaining tremendous strength in terms of its relationships with China and India. And we are seeing the law of unintended consequences. We've damaged the European economy. We've boosted the Indian economy greatly. And we've turned the Russian economy into a war economy. So it is going to be much harder for Mr. Putin to stop war unless we completely give up sanctions, because the only way he can keep going is with the war economy. But Al, I am going to have to beg off because I realize I have another call I've got to jump to on.
Sure.
I can't deal with Gaza, but it's been lovely to meet all of you. And Yogi, I hope next time I will get to see you and talk about Africa, which I'd love to do. So Al, thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you. Yoji, you're muted. Unmute if you would. Thank you, Bob. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I want to ask about the schism between the Russian and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Which one he represents?
He represents
There was a schism a few years ago.
Yeah, he says he's representing the Ukrainian church and not the Russian church. But we'll come back to that conversation.
Yeah, that's why I got confused, because the Ukrainian that got independent from the Russian with the
Now, your connection is unstable, Yoji, so I cannot hear you. Let me do this. I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane, a rich conversation.
the Constantinople one.
Okay, and let me pivot now to bring you up, Antonio, because you wanted to talk about Gaza. And let me just turn it over to you. And what is it that you want to share? Thanks to all of our listeners here on KFAI and those who are connected with us on our digital platforms. Thanks to Helen Edwards and Michelle, who's a regular viewer, and others, wherever you are. If you got a comment, drop it into a comment on any of the platforms, and we'd like to shout you out. We want you to share this conversation with all of your networks. Antonio Rosell.
Thank you, Al. So thank you for hosting this conversation too about Gaza. As you know, this is a tragic situation that has been taking place now for almost 5 months in front of the eyes of the whole world. Wholesale killing of civilians, more than 30,000 civilians killed now in 5 months. The majority of them, it's about 70% women and children. About 13,000 of the people killed in Gaza are children. And one of the reasons why it's important for us to talk about it, in your show and elsewhere here in the United States, is that as a nation, we are facilitating that. We are helping to make that happen. I don't know how many of our listeners today know this, but the United States just last week, for the third time in about 4 months, vetoed a ceasefire resolution that would have forced an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the killing. So the Biden administration, for the third time at the United Nations Security Council, voted against an immediate ceasefire. And by doing that, because we're a permanent member of the Security Council, the whole thing is stopped and it cannot move forward. And this is after, about a month ago, the United Nations International Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the whole world, said what Israel is doing in Gaza can be plausibly classified as a genocide. And so, it's not, it's not Antonio saying it's a genocide. It's not, Mr. Amsterdam or anybody. It's the International Court of Justice saying this looks like a genocide and this needs to stop right now. So even after knowing that we still vetoed the whole world community coming together to say, this needs to stop. We said no. And not only that, but we continue to send weapons. We continue to fund Israel's military. And it's the Biden administration that has been leading that. And, and it's our senators as well. I've been contacting Senator Klobuchar, Senator Tina Smith every day, just about, not just me, lots of people have been calling to say, hey, please work for a ceasefire. This has to stop. And they do the opposite.
Well, let me play the devil's advocate here, in the sense that it's not just Biden's policy, it's U.S. policy. It's historic policy. And so I don't want the policy to be draped around the Biden administration. This policy is consistent with our policy towards the nation of Israel since its creation, I think. And it seems to me, Antonio, that one scenario is that if the United States supported the world body's call for a ceasefire, it had no authority to enact the ceasefire. And so there's an argument that given the present leadership in Israel's commitment and professed intent to eradicate the threat of Hamas, that intent would supersede or turn a blind eye toward the demand of the world, because it's describing its position as existential. And so would it make sense for the Biden administration to vote against the position that it has both created and sustained over the years, rather than, number one, continuing its support of Israel in some way, but at the same time working to create an acceptable ceasefire? This is just one train of thought that I have. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it comes to what is our position as a nation when we're discussing, if we have indications of genocide somewhere, what is our position? Are we for genocide? Are we supporters of genocide? Are we aiders and abettors of genocide, right? A lot of people, and this is a conversation that probably all of us had, and people say, well, if I was alive during the Holocaust, I'm sure I would have helped people escape the Nazis. If I was alive during the days of slavery, I would have been an abolitionist. If I was alive during the genocide against indigenous Native American people, I would have worked against it. And today, you go to meetings, and oftentimes now we have land acknowledgements when we come in and say, we're on the land of the Dakota people, and what was done then was wrong. And so you'd think that we would have learned something, right? And you think that we would have listened to the prophets who have lived among us. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, for example, he was incredibly clear about the evil that we were perpetrating on the people of Vietnam, and courageously spoke against it, back in 1967. And a lot of people said, don't talk about it, just talk about civil rights. And he said, no, because civil rights are human rights, and our money that funds this destruction in the jungles of Vietnam is money that we're taking away from our hungry kids, from our schools, from our neighborhoods, and we're using it to create destruction and to create evil and pain. So
let me acknowledge one of our viewers, Brenda Gifford, and thank her for her comments and for listening. She says, your anti-Israel bias is showing in the same way as the quote unquote International Court of Justice. And she says it's disappointing to listen to this. Brenda, I respect and appreciate your comments, and thank you for voicing your feelings. Antonio, respond if you would.
Well, I don't know that I have shown any anti-Israel bias in speaking against the killing of 30,000 civilians. I actually don't think that it's equivalent. I think that we have, if we have friends who are doing something wrong, if I have a friend, I go out and my friend has had too many cups to drink of wine or beer, and he wants to get in his car, if I really am his friend, I'm going to say to my friend, hey, you can't get in that car. And not only do I say that, but I take away his keys to help him from getting into trouble where he will hurt himself and hurt others. Okay. And I think that people who love Israel and want Israel to continue should be the first ones to say, my friend, what you are doing is actually very wrong. You are killing people who have not hurt you. You are killing women, 13,000 children. Do you know how huge that is? There are cities, multiple, probably 80% of the cities in Minnesota have fewer than 13,000 people. Now imagine all of those cities full of children. That's what is occurring. And the reason why it's important for us as a nation to be aware of this is because we're funding it. It's our money that's doing that. Israel, and I'll take even a kind of what I think is a little bit of a repugnant position, but I'll do it just for the sake of argument. If Israel wants to commit war crimes and wants to commit genocide, well, in a way, ultimately, it's on them. But why should we in the United States fund that? Why should we pay for that? Why should the St. Paul Teachers Union voted to strike, and they're in negotiations now on the 11th of March. That is, just about less than a week from today. And you know why? Because they don't have enough money to pay teacher salaries and to fund their health insurance for the teachers in St. Paul. And in the meantime, we're debating about sending $14 billion so that Israel, in this case, can continue to kill people in Gaza. And I think that that's something that we got to think. I mean, and that's not a moral argument. That's like a financial argument, right? The moral argument is if we say that we are for human rights, if we say that we are for respecting the other, if we love life, and if we think that all people have equal worth, which we do, and we love diversity, and we say we love all these things, we need to act consistently with that. So that's the position.
Yogi, jump in. Any comments? Hopefully your line is more stable now.
Well, I go along with the lines of Lula that has been vehemently against what's going on in Gaza. As I mentioned to you earlier, I do have Jewish blood. In certain way, it would give me a little bit of latitude to be critical of them. And it's unsustainable what is going on in Palestine. There is no explanation, unless also if you understand that these Jewish people is the same one from the Law of Solomon, right? That in many ways, I think this punishment that they want to inflict to the Palestinians has got to be, in a biblical proportion, how they generally they do in the Bible, right? How they react, overreacting, overkilling to set the example. But the United States now is dropping aid in certain way because the backlash at home, principally with the Arab American electorate, that is of good support for Biden. So the United States always been in the wrong position, supporting the wrong actors or doing themselves the wrong actions. So this issue of the Middle East, Gaza, Israel, it's been going on for a long time, has directly involvement at first of the British government and then the American government for geopolitical and economical reasons to be close to the producers of oil in a certain way. And it's a classical replication of the colonialist structure that happened in the Americas, in the US, a replacement of native populations, push them away, put them in reservations, and absorption of them, and Israel is the same. Instead of British colonizers, pilgrims, are the Ashkenazi Jews. Also, we got to distinguish that is a very European mindset of Jews in Israel. They are the Ashkenazi Jews that are descendants of the Khazars that might not be really, one of the tribes that left. But anyway, it is the same European colonialism applied to the population of Palestine. Thus, that population of Palestine, it was comprised of Christians and Sepharad Jews, Mizrahi Jews, but mainly Sepharad Jews, right? Those Jews that got expelled from Spain, Portugal during the Inquisition, they were the ones that were in Palestine when the Ashkenazi arrived with the idea of Zionism.
30 seconds before we wrap up. Let me thank you, Yogi. Antonio, 20 seconds on the backlash. What's going on right now as you see it?
Well, worldwide, there is a whole denunciation of U.S. actions. Locally, I don't know if the Michigan primaries last week, people voting uncommitted in the Democratic primaries. The same effort is going on here in Minnesota. People wanting to let the Biden administration know that they don't support Biden's actions. A lot of them are voting uncommitted in the primaries today. So maybe listeners, if they want to participate and say, no, this is not, don't do this in our name.
We're out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Good to see you again. We'll see you next time. I'm Al McFarlane. Thank you for listening to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you.
Thank you.